Hello and welcome to episode 3 of AMEB's Break the Isolation webinar series. This one titled Strategies for Online Teaching. Before we head into it, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and community. We pay our respects to them and their cultures and to elders past, present and emerging. Thank you for joining us today. We already have 216 attendees. This webinar series aims to bring us together as a community of musicians and teachers, keep us connected and share creative ideas during this odd time. You can get involved by asking our panel questions or sharing ideas with other participants via our live chat function. If you're new to Zoom, you'll find that there's a chat button down the bottom, or it could be in the bottom right-hand side. If you send messages through to that chat function, my colleague Leah will be on the other end and will send whatever questions she can through to me at the end of the session. So please do use that chat function as much as you'd like to. I'm Steve Hodgson. I'm the head of publishing for AMEB, and I'm very lucky to be joined today by 3 wonderful panelists for this webinar on the theme of strategies for online teaching. We have Yvonne Moore, Brendan Collins and Tim Moxey. I'll introduce each of the panelists one by one so you can hear who they are exactly. Yvonne Moore is a multi-string instrumental teacher who has been teaching for the Queensland Department of Education and Training for 29 years. Over this time, she has taught via radio, phone, and now the internet. And her first posting was in Charleville in 1991, followed by Coastal Service, then 15 years in Mount Isa. After moving to Brisbane, Yvonne started teaching distance education string students online in Longreach, Central Queensland, and at schools in Brisbane. Yvonne is a passionate advocate for online music teaching and has been doing remote teaching for longer than most people have. I think you said the other day, this is the time that you were born for, teaching online and teaching remotely. We also have Brendan Collins. In 2005, Brendan was appointed to the teaching staff of Barker College in the role of composer in residence. This appointment followed an 11-year period as associate principal trombone with Opera Australia. Aside from preparing Barker's elective music students for the composition components of the HSC, Brendan teaches bands, brass ensembles and individual brass students at the school. In addition to his work at Barker, Brendan runs an active and successful private teaching studio and is currently the Chief Brass Examiner of AMEB New South Wales, where he's recently been involved in the development of the new trumpet and low brass syllabuses. And I believe, Brendan, you're more of a newcomer to teaching online. And we're very, very happy. Yeah. Very, very happy to have you on board.
Absolutely.
Giving the brass perspective.
Yeah.
And finally,
I hope I can share.
Sorry about that. I think we lost you a little bit. Finally, Tim Moxey. Tim is the creative director of the Sydney Vocal Academy and is a highly respected performer and educator, as well as being a contemporary and musical theatre professional. He teaches masterclasses, workshops, and examines tertiary music student recitals. Welcome, Tim. I believe you're feeling very comfortable in the online environment, having done it for quite a lot of time. And we're very, very happy to have you giving a vocal perspective to the panel. So I thought the way that we might run this is by attacking various aspects of giving an online lesson and getting a little bit of feedback on the way in which you had to adapt your teaching style and teaching strategies to make it work online, and the sort of things that people might want to think about to give the best online lessons possible. So, I mean, the first, the very beginning is starting the lesson and the kind of things that you might ask a student to do and that you might do yourself to start the lesson with both feet on the ground, really. Yvonne, is there anything that you think about when first starting the lesson, particularly in terms of tuning, in terms of having everybody set up, ready to go? What's the advice that you have on that topic?
I think it's really, really important to start your class very organised and to have an expectation that your student is adhering to those guidelines before they actually come on for their lesson. So I'm a tuning person, have been using apps and tuners for years, but I think we need to walk parents through those processes, and the beauty of technology today means that you can YouTube how to tune an instrument so that parents on the other end can assist smaller children, but to set our students up to be able to tune themselves and come into the class all ready to go, ready to learn, rather than spending, like the old days, 20 minutes tuning an instrument and then ending up with a broken string.
So it's a little bit about getting parents involved and having parents develop a few skills that they might not have in the past. I know, especially for a violin and for all string instruments, tuning is quite a difficult part of the process, and often teachers will tune the instruments when somebody rocks up for a face-to-face lesson.
And it's very difficult for lots of teachers who have taught that way for a very long time to come outside their comfort zone and go, no, I need to put the responsibility onto the student that they learn how to tune, all the parents, and take away that responsibility from them, because I can't tune my students if they're 2,000 kilometres away. So it's really important to put that ownership back onto the family.
And do you have any tips? Do you have, is there anything that you run the parents through?
This is my favourite, Tuner Lite, because I like the fact that the child or the parent can put the tuner on a phone or an iPad, and they can literally lie their instrument down next to the tuner and see the physical action, so they're able to support. Then if it comes up as a C sharp, the parents will automatically know, well, that's then a peg tune rather than a D where a child could just do that. So I think that's really important to walk that through. And then tuning can waste so much of a string child's life in lessons.
Absolutely. Are there similar issues with brass players, Brendan? Are you finding that you need to encourage students to be more prepared than they usually would be?
Oh, definitely more prepared, and I think they need more things other than just the instrument and the music. I like to have all my students have a pencil and a metronome handy, because I can no longer click to keep them in time. They need a metronome, and I love this because it really makes the student research their own learning a little bit, because they have to find the metronome marking through the metronome. They have to get the pencil and maybe put the tempo markings, the articulations, the slurs, everything on there. So I know they're very, very simple devices, but I've found lessons are far, far more effective if people have a pencil and a metronome with them to start with. As for tuning up, fortunately, all brass instruments are perfectly in tune. It's only people that make them out of tune. We don't have 4 strings, so I'm not really focusing on tuning the instrument, but I do talk intonation from the beginning of the lesson right through, as I would with a face-to-face lesson as well.
Sure. Tim, what sort of preparation do you ask your students to do that might be different to a face-to-face or in the flesh kind of teaching situation?
So we're a contemporary singing school, so a lot of the stuff that we do is with backing tracks. So we're always making sure that our kids have their backing tracks, or our students have their backing tracks on a separate device with a Bluetooth speaker or something that kind of amplifies the sound bigger, that they can actually sing along with. And it's funny how many of our students ended up with not having their tracks. Like, they come to lessons and they didn't have it. So going through this whole preparation period of going, no, now you need to have your own tracks, has been a really great thing for us, because it's meant that the kids are more focused at home and have all the resources that they need at home. The rock school, any of our kids that are doing the rock school exams or the AMEB musical theatre exams as well, they're really great because they have the tracks with the books, so they can just download those and work with those. So those students that have been preparing for those have actually had everything they need. We also work with pre-recorded vocal exercises and pre-recorded the examples of the musical theatre tech work and things like that. So we've kind of pre-recorded that for kids so they can work with that on their side as well.
And have it all ready to go from the
Yeah,
very
definitely.
beginning. That makes a lot of sense. And how about for yourselves? I mean, is there a difference in the way that you prepare for lessons online versus, you know, more traditional delivery?
Yes, may I add to that one, Stephen? I've actually changed the way I've taught over the years. I no longer do lesson plans. I actually do unit plans, so that, say, if there's a variable that pops up, it might be the fact that technology cuts in and out, or a child breaks a string, or something, to have units of work rather than a structured lesson plan, because there's always something that will change. So perfect example there is, yeah, so say if you break the A string, I can still keep working on elements of the D string, maybe able to teach a natural or something else, rather than always having to rely on that normal structure with which we've worked in the past.
So contingency plans for anything. We had a webinar, the previous webinar, episode 2, with Emily Laney from Texas, and she spoke a little bit about the real contingency plan if everything goes wrong and there's a poor internet connection, of the idea of recording the entire lesson, and it might be a truncated, more concentrated lesson of 10 minutes rather than half an hour, but having some sort of backup along those lines. But you are thinking more along the lines of individual skill units, and having a variety of those prepared so that you could swap them in and out.
Correct. Yes.
The building blocks. Have you, Brendan or Tim, found that this has been an issue? Do you have any strategy for when things go wrong?
When things go terribly wrong, I find that if it's absolutely a disaster, and I did have one lesson where we couldn't connect and the link didn't work, it was so easy just to organise another time. When I'm face to face, having people come to my studio is such a big deal. We find that really difficult to come up with. I didn't have a problem with organising a different time and just converting the lesson onto the following day. I think if I was face to face, I probably wouldn't have been able to do that. Lives get very, very busy. But online, I find is so easy to just, oh, well, we'll make it this time. We'll go to another time. And that seems to work particularly well. Although
you don't really want to spend your whole life as a teacher rescheduling lessons.
Absolutely not. But I think when it's a complete write-off and you can't have that lesson, I found it easier to reschedule as an online lesson than I would have had it been a face-to-face lesson.
Tim, have you found any issues? Do you have a strategy around when things go wrong?
So we've been rescheduling lessons if something goes just direly wrong. Like I had one last night that the student and I just could not connect, and I was just like, look, I'm just going to call it. Let's reschedule this one. But in our studio, we actually have a system of people being able to cancel. Like our makeup policy is quite good for the student, because they can cancel a lesson and put in a makeup somewhere else, and so people can do their own makeup systems with the system that we use. So it's been pretty much like the face-to-face, but I think we've been trying to be a little more flexible in this current time with makeups and technology glitches than we probably would be with doing it face-to-face.
And may I add to that too, Stephen, I feel as we head forward and our economic situation within our country changes, I keep thinking about multiple lessons. So we might have 3 or 4 students at the same level coming on to a lesson together as an economy saver for our communities.
Yes, we were going to talk a little bit about that. I think that's a really interesting perspective. And you know, we're all aware that there will be economic changes coming about as this all unfolds. Now, in terms of teaching multiple students online, what have been the challenges along those lines, and how do you find how have you been able to solve those problems on an online platform?
Well, I'm very fortunate, Stephen, because I do work for Education Queensland, that we have a system that does cater for multiple screens. And I think once everybody gets their heads around what platform they're able to deliver from, it's then essentially putting like students together in that one platform and delivering the same lesson, but to multiple participants.
So not at the same time, when we're not talking about...
Yes, all at the same time, just like we're doing here today.
Wow. And how do you find especially younger children coping with that? What have you put in place to make sure that kids aren't talking over the top of each other, that it's not just doesn't become cacophonous?
Well, we work on online etiquette. So the children actually, and I have to confess, I've started to do it today on this. We raise our hands when it's our turn to come in. And as you can imagine, if you've got 6 or 8-year-olds, they all want to tell you what's happened for the week. So I actually encourage them in the chat box to tell their weekly story before we start the lesson. Then we also work on that being tuned, ready to start the lesson, but that support at home with parents so that once we're there, and then just a pocket full of tricks to keep the action going so that every child is embraced and part of that lesson. But yes, multiple lessons teaching the same concept, having 6 children learn Twinkle Twinkle at the same time.
That's amazing. Tim and Brendan, have you had any experience with group lessons online?
Oh, look, maybe Tim can give you more of an insight than I can. I'm generally not a great fan of group lessons in any format. I find that you can often find a common starting point, but as time goes by, then the progress rate of each person in your class tends to vary, and I find that really difficult. In fact, Yvonne, when you do your groups, do they always stay in the same group, or do you then restructure those students?
Yes, lots of restructuring within timetables takes place because children all learn at different speeds.
And that's the only way I could see it actually working is if you're prepared to start with a particular group, and then at other points you might need to change the personnel of those groups so that everybody's at a similar level.
And look, within the nature of my work, it is all group-based. It's never been individual lessons. So for me, the thought of individual is like cream at the top, you know, the icing once they're at that great standard. But to get to that level, it is all group-based. And it's that constant moving and changing. And what I love about groups is you get that little bit of peer support happening within students. Sometimes you can call it peer pressure. Sometimes it comes with different angles. But often a student... I'm not noticing something within the lesson, the student will come on and say, hey, such and such, do you notice that you're doing this wrong? And so I think that's got some great team building strategies and wonderful things for learning.
Obviously, that's at the harder end of the etiquette spectrum. Brendan and Tim, have you had to give students tips on lesson etiquette that wasn't really required before we took everything online?
I've been employing the group mute function. I quite like the fact that I can just mute all, and kind of wish that sometimes I had that in real life. I tend to teach a lot of teenagers, and teenagers like to talk a lot. And I try to keep a big. I mean, we run lots of group classes at our singing school, and one of the big reasons for that is, I mean, group singing is a really important thing for young singers. And often like the solo singers don't like to sing in groups, but the group lessons really kind of bring that into something they can do. And then we do a lot of solo singing as well, and they perform for each other, and that encouragement and that the collaboration and just giving each other compliments and things, or critiques is actually a really important part of what we do at our school.
I mean, there's so much to get your head around with this different mode. We've actually gotten to 20 past very, very quickly, and I'd like to throw open to a few questions from our viewers relatively shortly. But there's 2 things I'd like to really ask the panel about. One is feedback that we received from teachers so far has been about the level of difficulty in keeping especially young students engaged online when you're not actually in the room with them, and which might involve a little bit of parental assistance as well. Yvonne, have you found any great solutions for keeping kids engaged when they're staring at a screen rather than in the room with you?
Absolutely. I use an app called Staff Wars, STAFFWARS, Staff Wars, so they can actually be practicing notation. And once again, it comes back to that scenario where I have multiple students on at one time. So if I'm actually working with a student trying to sort an issue with their playing or discuss something with parents within that lesson, you need to have other things for the students to do. Because if not, often, they'll go running around the classroom or do like they do in a normal classroom. So it's really important. And then I often have type into the box different. So if I'm teaching, I'm talking away to the lesson, but I'm also typing and leaving instructions. So if for some reason they can't hear me or they need some top-up work, the parents can simply have a little read in the chat box, keep moving forward on what they're working on. And once again, if I go mute the line and we have, hands up and then the stop mute symbols and things. Some teachers go like this, I've seen, meaning to mute their lines, and off the kids will go, and they might work on a different song, and they might work on one of their apps. There's all those different strategies. And this day of technology, also I encourage my students to, if I am working with someone, record what we've just played, your little twinkle twinkle, have a little watch back at your own playing, and that also helps fill those lessons as well.
Right. That's really interesting. So having multiple activities going on so that you can bring focus to particular students.
It may be as simple as a staff bingo, so that the parents can actually sit with the child, work on the different lines. So you're using those play-based games that we've always used, but you're giving families access to those things that they've got them all at home ready to go for a lesson.
Amazing. Tim and Brendan, have you had any issues with keeping students engaged? I know you both work in different age groups.
Well, Stephen, you did raise the point about parents being involved in the lessons. I find they're far more actively involved in online lessons than they are in face-to-face. If they come to my house for a lesson, the parents will often sit in the background and not play an active role in the lesson at all. But I'm finding that they often set up the computer, they set up the visual and the audio so that the lesson's going to operate well. And then they disappear, but they don't seem to disappear very far away. I'll often say to a student, okay, we've finished with this piece, let's get out your list D. And then it's quite funny really, because magically an arm will often come up in front of the screen with the music or with whatever I've asked for. The parent is so close because I'm not inviting them into my studio, I'm actually a guest in their house. And so I think the parents are taking a lot more interest in the lessons because it's in their comfortable environment. And I really do think, I know I've only been doing this for a short time, but I think the parents then play a really active role in supervising the practice sessions beyond that lesson because they've paid so much attention to the lesson and they've been so involved in it. So I've actually found that a real positive for the online learning.
Have you had to give any guidance to parents as to what might be helpful and what might not be?
I've never had one be unhelpful at this point, and I always encourage parents to be as involved as possible, particularly when it comes to supervising the practice that follows the lesson. So if they're active in my online lessons, I think that's fantastic.
That's great. And time is really getting away from us already. The final point I really wanted to have a quick discussion about was looking after ourselves as music teachers. A lot of teachers have reported that it's a bit of a jump in energy requirements, and certainly in terms of looking after your own vocal health. I know this is something of an area of expertise for you, Tim. Do you have any advice for teachers who are finding they're losing their voice at the end of the day or finding it hard to keep the energy levels up in front of a Zoom camera the whole time?
Yeah, so obviously my setup at the moment is I've got a little bit more of a complex thing kind of going on. But one of the things I've found the best for my voice and for my the fatigue of my voice is actually to have my microphone going into my headphones. So I actually have an audio interface set up here that runs my microphone into my ears. rather than just having kind of dead sound or just the sound from Zoom coming out. And it means that I speak less. I have to be less loud, or I talk. I find when I have headphones on and I don't have it coming down into the headphones, I talk a lot louder and I use my voice a lot more, and it makes me push greater. So that to me was one of the biggest game changers. And then I don't know if other people have found this, but when I started doing this, I found that I had to use a lot more energy doing the online thing. But as I've kind of settled into it, I've found that's and as I've kind of found the strategies that work the best for me, I've kind of settled into it a bit more. It's actually calmed down a lot more. So it's just getting over that initial hump of getting used to it, I think, as well. Oh, you're muted there.
Yvonne,
Yes.
Yvonne, you've been doing this a long time. Were there any strategies that you had for keeping the energy levels up, for trying to reduce the vocal fatigue on just talking into a camera all day?
Well, I actually find it's a much better format than being at school with 70 children in front of me. And then I have to use a full headset and a microphone to be heard over that many just in a space. So I actually find this a really comfortable medium, even with multiple screens and multiple students. I believe it's much better for our vocal care. And when I go soft, the kids, they become more embraced. And I think it has those it's just a different way of learning. I think it's just about getting your head around how best to deliver what you would normally do within a normal classroom or with a normal lesson, one-on-one lesson, just in a completely different format. But yes, I love to wear earphones because I can't guarantee when I'm at home if the neighbours will mow the lawn, all those sorts of other variables. And I also like remote headphones, so that I can play my violin with nothing getting tangled and all those types of things. I do find with a lot of the big headphone sets, sometimes you can get like a burning ear issue. So it's really important to have a good quality headset or, a device that works best for you, but try different ones and see what best suits and how to best get the noises out of the background, if that's to make sense. Yes, because that can be very distracting for students. And we're talking young students. I notice we all have a lovely clean background behind us, but certainly if I've moved a painting or a picture, those little 8-year-olds will always tell me.
Look, thank you so much for that. We will try to get through as many of the questions that we've had come through via chat just quickly. First one, I like to play along with my violin students. How can we overcome the glitches and lag? I'll just start that by saying I don't think we can. At the moment, there's a certain amount of time it takes for the signal to go out there into the wide world and then back into your students. So there's no, it requires breaking of some of the fundamental laws of physics for it to be instantaneous. Have you guys found better or worse ways of working, better or worse platforms in terms of lag and glitches?
I think the easiest way is me play, you play. I demonstrate a lot more and then I have the student respond. I used to love playing with my students as well, but I think the me play, you play approach is equally as good, if not better, because it makes them listen a little bit more astutely.
And may I add to that also, my Tempo app with your AMEB recordings, my students will play with that recording at a speed that we set. And so I'm still hearing them playing along with another violinist rather than me playing along.
Oh, great. So using existing recordings in place of your own playing, that's a good tip. But yes, as far as I know, there is no solution to instantaneous transfer of audio over online. Maybe for Tim, which video platform do you find the best for sending pre-recorded tracks to students?
Pre-recorded tracks, we do it all. We've got a website that we use. Sorry. Well, there's a couple of ways that we've been doing pre-recorded tracks. One of the pre-recorded things that we're doing at the moment, and I've seen a couple of people asking about this. Group singing is really impossible on any of these kind of platforms, but we've been actually doing a project-based thing where we give them their parts and they sing their part with their headphones in, and then we compile that all together. So it's not necessarily they're all singing together, but it's kind of the best that we can do at this particular point. So we'll just send them the tracks individually, but we also use Thinkifik as a online learning platform, and we have courses and things that our kids can go in and do with scales and technique and those kind of things as well.
Right. Sorry, what was that platform?
Thinkifik.
Okay. Could you spell that for our audience?
No, because that is something that my wife handles, and I don't actually know. I just know that is the platform.
Sure. I'm sure Leah will try and find a link to that that she'll put out on the chat.
There you go.
Chat channel. So microphones. This is probably for you, Brendan. The iPads and iPhones and whatever else, other devices that people tend to have in their homes work quite well for voice. I think they work quite well for strings. Something like a saxophone or a tuba or a trombone, possibly not as well. How have you found any solutions in terms of microphones?
Look, there's a couple of things that you can do. You can use the original sound if you're using Zoom. That tends to stop some of the limiting. But of course, as soon as a brass instrument gets too loud, there's an automatic distortion or cutting off of the sound. You can sometimes get away with that by doing distance. And I know my sister, who's a string teacher in Tasmania University, she actually gets students to record a lot of their pieces before the lesson, and then they listen to them together. So it's a clear recorded sound, and it's not something that you're just relying on online. So that's a good approach. I haven't used that, but I think that would be more appropriate to advanced students. I think I get a pretty clear indication of how the student's playing. I may not get 100% audio quality coming through my computer, but having worked with brass students for so long, I've got a pretty good understanding of how well they're playing, even if there is a little bit of distortion in the recorded sound. Okay,
but no particular new equipment that you've
if you're asking for equipment, probably Tim's your man for that one. I just try and make it work on the platform that I've decided to use, and I think it works pretty well. Yep.
Yeah, that's great. Look, we need to wrap things up pretty quickly, but there was just one more question I'd love to ask, and it's about new students that you haven't encountered in person and that you're only encountering online. Obviously, a lot of people are transitioning to online from in the flesh type situations, but could the panel describe how they establish a good rapport with new pupils online? Any experiences to share? Maybe Yvonne.
Well, I treat it the same as a normal classroom and talk to the students, and we always we have just basic introductions and the ways that you'd normally handle students in a normal classroom. I don't think an online forum changes that. I actually think that because we're, like Brendan was saying, we're in their homes now, they actually have so much more to talk about. And I actually find if you say to them, show me around your house, well, you just lost your lesson. But, you know, there's just those little things that you can do to get to know your student the same as you would if they're in the classroom. To me, it's got no difference. It's,
sure.
You know, it's very different when it was in the old days where you couldn't see things, but because we can see everything nowadays, you know, they'll talk about, oh, you had your hair cut, Mrs. Moore, or, you know, there's all those things, you know. Students are very interactive. And because they're used to using this technology and they're used to looking at an iPad or a phone, they feel very comfortable with talking to you through a screen.
Sure. Tim, have you had, do you have anything to share about new students online?
I haven't had a lot of experience with that. I mean, like the transition for us online has been with a very existing community already. So it's not, I'm sorry, that's not something I've had to deal with a lot yet.
No, sure.
We'll see what happens in the next couple of months.
Absolutely. Maybe we'll have another webinar down the track.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you so much, all three of you, to our wonderful panelists, Yvonne Moore, Tim Moxey and Brendan Collins, for their views and perspectives for this webinar. Remember that AMEB is here to help during this time. Our website, ameb.edu.au, has lots of useful resources, especially in our Here to Help section. For teachers, students and parents to keep the music alive during this time. This is really our great mission at the moment. Join us this Thursday at 1 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time for our next episode, Ensemble Teaching Online with Ingrid Martin. Register at the chat register at the link in the chat that will be coming up shortly, or visit our website for details. We hope you can join us then. Thank you again to all three of our guests, and thank you to everybody who's attended. We hope that this has been illuminating, or at least made you feel a little bit more connected to the outside world. We look forward to seeing, to interacting with all of you again shortly via webinar or whatever other way. So thank you very much.
And happy music making, everyone.
Happy music making. Thank you so much.